I'm 86 years old. That's not a dramatic opening, it's just a fact. At this age, facts are easier than pretending. For 40 years I carried a truth I never said out loud. Not because it was dangerous, not because it would have destroyed my life, but because it would have changed how people saw me, and I wasn't ready for that. Most people think the hardest lies are the big ones, the shocking ones, the kind that blow lives apart. But the truth is, the most damaging lies are usually small, quiet, convenient. They slip into your life so gently you don't even realize they're there. Mine did. If you'd met me in my 40s or 50s, you would have said I had things figured out. People did say that. They said I was dependable, steady, someone you could count on. I wore that reputation carefully, like a suit that fit well enough that no one questioned it, including me. The truth I hid wasn't about infidelity, it wasn't about money, it wasn't about betrayal in the way people usually mean it, it was about fear. A fear I never admitted to anyone, not my friends, not my children, not even the woman I spent my life with. For decades I told myself I was being strong, responsible, practical. But strength, I've learned, can sometimes be nothing more than silence in disguise. The truth is this. For 40 years I pretended I was satisfied with a life I never fully chose. I told myself it didn't matter. I told everyone else the same thing. And slowly that lie became the story of my life. When I was young, I had a very clear idea of who I was supposed to be, not who I wanted to be, who I was supposed to be. I followed that path carefully, not because it excited me, but because it felt safe. There was comfort in doing what made sense, in choosing stability over uncertainty, approval over curiosity. At the time, it didn't feel like a sacrifice. It felt like adulthood. I didn't wake up one day and abandon my dreams. I set them aside politely. I told myself I'd return to them later, when things were settled, when responsibilities eased. Later became my favourite word. Years passed, then decades, and the truth I was hiding wasn't from others anymore. It was from myself. I stopped asking certain questions, stopped noticing certain feelings. I learned how to stay busy enough that nothing uncomfortable had room to surface. People praised me for that. They said I was disciplined, focused, reliable. What they didn't see was how much effort it took to keep the other version of myself quiet, the version that wondered, the version that felt restless, the version that asked, "Is this really it?" I told myself those questions were childish, selfish. I had responsibilities, a family, people who depended on me, so I kept going. Here's something no one tells you. If you stay busy long enough, discomfort turns into numbness. Not pain, not sadness, just absence. There were moments, small ones, when the truth tried to surface. Late at night, long drives, quiet mornings when the house was still. I'd feel it then, that hollow awareness that something in my life had gone unspoken for too long. And every time I'd push it down, not today, not worth upsetting anyone, not necessary. I convinced myself silence was kindness, that not rocking the boat was maturity. What I didn't realize was that I was slowly removing myself from my own life. The truth I hid wasn't explosive, it was simple. I wasn't fulfilled. And admitting that felt like failure. How do you tell the people you love that the life you built together, the one everyone admires, isn't enough? How do you say that without sounding ungrateful? Without hurting someone who did nothing wrong? So I didn't. I smiled. I showed up. I did what was expected, and the lie kept growing. Over time, the cost became subtle. Conversations stayed surface level. Decisions were made out of habit, not desire. I stopped talking about what I wanted because I wasn't sure anymore. It had been so long since I'd listened to myself that my own voice felt unfamiliar. People assumed I was content because I never complained. They mistook my silence for peace. I let them. There's a difference between peace and resignation. I didn't know that then. The truth stayed hidden for 40 years because I believed revealing it would cause damage. I believed honesty would disrupt everything I'd worked so hard to maintain. What I didn't understand was that dishonesty had already done its damage, slowly, quietly, invisibly. The turning point didn't come with a dramatic event. No illness, no argument, no betrayal. It came in an ordinary moment. Those are the dangerous ones. I was sitting alone one evening, doing nothing in particular. No urgency, no distractions. And it occurred to me that if someone asked me why I'd made certain choices in my life, I wouldn't have an honest answer. Not one I'd ever said out loud. That realization unsettled me more than any crisis ever had, because for the first time I saw the pattern clearly. I hadn't chosen my life, I'd accepted it. That night I didn't sleep much, not because I was upset, but because the lie had finally lost its grip. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. It took me months after that to say anything. I rehearsed the words in my head, changed them, softened them. I didn't want to accuse anyone. I didn't want to rewrite the past. I just wanted to be honest before there was no time left. When I finally admitted the truth, it wasn't dramatic. There were no raised voices, no tears, just silence. The kind of silence that comes when something real enters the room. I said what I'd never said before, that I had lived much of my life on autopilot, that I'd followed expectations instead of curiosity, that I'd convinced myself contentment would arrive eventually, and that it never did. I didn't say it to assign blame. I said it because I was tired of carrying it alone. The response surprised me, not because it was perfect, but because it was human. There was confusion, sadness, questions, but there was also understanding. And in that moment I realized something painful and freeing at the same time. I could have told the truth decades earlier. The world wouldn't have collapsed. The people who loved me wouldn't have vanished. What I'd been protecting wasn't anyone else. It was my image of myself. That realization hurt because it meant the years of silence were unnecessary, self-inflicted. After that conversation, things didn't magically improve. Honesty doesn't work that way. But something shifted. I felt lighter, not happier, clearer. I started noticing how often I'd chosen comfort over authenticity, how often I'd avoided discomfort at the cost of connection, how much of my life had been shaped by what felt safe instead of what felt true. There are consequences to hiding for 40 years. You don't get those years back. Some doors don't reopen. Some versions of yourself never return, and you have to make peace with that. I don't live in regret, but I do live with awareness, and awareness is heavier than people think. If you're watching this and thinking, this doesn't apply to me, I understand. I thought that too. I told myself I had time to sort things out, time to speak up, time to live more honestly later. Later is an easy promise to make, but later is not guaranteed, and silence has a way of becoming permanent if you let it. The truth I hid for 40 years didn't ruin my life when I finally admitted it. What ruined parts of my life was hiding it for so long. I don't say that to scare anyone. I say it because honesty doesn't become easier with time. It becomes heavier. At 86, there's very little left to perform for. People my age aren't impressive, we're just exposed. What remains is what was always there underneath. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this. Being honest earlier doesn't make life simpler, it makes it real. And real, even when it's uncomfortable, is better than perfect silence. I don't know who needs to hear this, maybe no one. But if you're carrying a truth you keep postponing, not because it's dangerous, but because it's inconvenient, consider what it's costing you. Not tomorrow, today. I waited 40 years. I don't recommend it. I'm 86 now. I finally admitted the truth I hid for most of my life. Not because it fixed everything, but because I wanted to live whatever time I had left without pretending. And that, more than anything else I ever achieved, feels like honesty.